Hi, welcome back. I'm Soudy Khan, Director of User Experience at Neuron, and today I'm going to talk about designing for military applications. So designing user experiences for military applications. And that statement is really, really broad. It's almost like saying I'm going to design for people. If you look at an aircraft carrier, for example, it really is as a complete city on the sea. And so much of military applications are not about being in combat. They're really about communications, logistics, medics, things like that. So I'm going to focus on kind of one scenario, come up with a few points to consider, and maybe a few possible solutions. And again, you'd have to do this on your own from scratch because everything is contextual to the specific case. But in this scenario, I'm going to talk about designing for a soldier who is downrange. That means that they're active in combat. So one of the three things I want to point out is the soldier in this situation must have absolute situational awareness. That means they must be very much aware of the things going on around them, what they're doing in relation to those things, and what they're doing on their own. So for example, where am I in relation to my unit? Where am I stepping? Where is my weapon pointed at? All of those different things need to be assessed, and they're constantly assessing that in a combat zone because of the very nature of combat. It's also because of the very nature of combat, it's a dynamically changing environment. And that's because of the unpredictability of the enemy, also the unfamiliar terrain, and poor intelligence often comes into play. So both on the enemy and the culture. Sometimes you think you're in a very friendly area and you're not, or it's the opposite. Lastly, because of these two things and because of traumatic injury, the soldier can be under a great deal of duress. I have seen so many things kind of designed in an office, in a cubicle, in a design studio that really don't consider that the soldier might be under a great deal of duress. Not just the constant stress, but actually being in a traumatic injury. So here's some things we can do. First, I would say, in general, think about creating very bite-sized pieces of information that are timely and contextual to that user. So kind of like the mobile way of designing, but taking that even further. Very small chunks of information that the user needs to access instantly or instantaneously. Careful not to overwhelm the user with too much information, too many things that are changing. Be cognizant of their other pieces of gear. So they might not have their hands free. They might be in an incredibly noisy environment. They might be in a lot of direct sunlight. You have to think about that, how that relates to iconography, right? You do have a captive audience, so you really need to put functionality way over form. In fact, functionality really kind of takes precedence over any sort of form, right? And then design flat rather than deep. So, if you look at a steering wheel, like a modern steering wheel of a car, we don't really think about this, but it's got a number of controls on it. It can have easily, 15, 16, 18 controls just on a steering wheel. That's not including the steering column that has other controls on it. But because we have time to acclimate to this piece of equipment, just like a soldier does, it's better to provide those affordances up front, as long as they know where they are, as long as they're grouped separately, rather than going deep. So don't make the soldier kind of go to one screen and down and down and down and down and be focused on this sort of exercise because of the fact that they need to have that situational awareness, that they're in a dynamically changing environment. So they kind of have a very small amount of time to multitask onto that thing, and their mind is constantly running in that multitasking cycle. One other thing I want to add, and this is just the nature of military contracts and developing for military projects, is that as designers, we face a lot of challenges in that military contracts are often very much sort of feature driven. There's a military specification, there's a complete detailed document, and often it has a list of features that need to be checked off, but there's nothing that says, oh, it must be intuitive. That's too soft, too fuzzy, and sometimes those features contradict one another. Kind of like saying, well, I want to, and this is a different example, but I want a car that handles well, and I also want it to be able to go over rocks and tree stumps. Well, those are two very different needs, and they're often in contradiction to one another. So hopefully over time, we'll start to see things that are requirements that are more soft, more qualitative, that will ultimately say, consider its functionality and its usability first. And hopefully that will change over time. Thanks a lot for listening. Have a good day.